What I want to do tonight is try to show how stuff changed, how stuff began. My stuff didn't begin as architecture, and it didn't begin as art. It began as writing. So I want to show how, at least the way I see it, how stuff went from one form, from one medium to another. Okay. I started as a writer. Towards the end of the time I was writing, from say 1966, 67 to 69. I wanted words to be maybe what they can't be. I wanted words to be matter. I wanted words to be material. I wasn't so interested in looking through words to content, to meaning. I wanted the words themselves maybe to be carriers of meaning, not by what they expressed, but how they moved on a page. In other words, when I was writing, what interested me was questions like, how do I move? How do I move from left margin to right margin? How do I move from one page to the next page, etc.? This was a time, or at least this was a time when and I think a lot of people were paying attention to statements like the French writer Raymond Roussel, who said things like, a book should begin on the first page and end on the last, or a Gertrude Stein statement about how maybe every short story and every novel should end when everybody dies, because the only place they exist is in that novel. So in a time influenced by writings like that, by statements like that, I wanted things to be as literal as possible. I began to think I couldn't use on a page a word like tree, a word like chair, because that referred to another space, a space off the page. I wanted words to refer only to the place they were on, so I could use words like here, there, at that time, in that place, words that referred to my action on the page. The attempt was always to make things as literal as possible, beginning a poem with a period and then playing on the notion of period. I have made my point. I make it again. It. Now you get the point. Or an attempt to do a poem that writes itself, starting with the phrase "let it go," going to the dictionary, and then writing down every word after the word "go" until I reach the bottom of the page. Probably the last piece of mine that I thought of as a piece of writing was or I don't know poetry so much, but maybe more writing in general. The last piece was used a page from a book on reading speed, how to improve reading speed, and the title I gave to it was "The Time Taken for Me to Walk from such and such a street to such and such a street." In other words, an attempt to make reading time equivalent to walking time. By the time I did a piece of writing like that, I thought, well, the writing had now taken me off the page. It had taken me off the page into actual space, physical space. So at the end of the 60s, in 1969, context changed. No longer did I think of myself in a writing context, but I thought of myself in an art context. Why art? Because at that time, I think what interested interested a number of people in art was that art seemed to be a kind of non-field field. Words like conceptual art, for example, were starting to be used. In other words, art seemed to be a field that maybe didn't have any particular characteristics of its own, except for the fact that it could be called art. So that art was a field into which you could import from other fields, from psychology, from history, from news. Okay, once I had put myself in an art context, the basic question I had was all my life, and I wasn't necessarily very young at that time. I was 29 in 1969, and it was a time when people were starting to become kind of well known in an art field at the age of 25, 26. So I was probably a kind of late starter. Once I was in this what was to me a new field, the question I had was, or the problem I had was, all my life up until that point, I knew what my ground was. My ground was this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper in front of me. Now I had taken myself away from that page. So the question was, now that I don't have the page anymore, now that I'm in actual space, now that I'm in physical space, what makes me move there? What gives me a reason to move there? So pieces for me started with trying to find a reason to move. This was a 1969 piece done for a program called Streetworks, in which a number of some artists, some poets were asked to do a piece over the period of a month, to do a piece involving the street, specifically New York streets. The piece I did had a very simple scheme. Each day for that month, I would pick out at random a person walking, a person in the street. Each day then I would follow a person, follow a different person each day until that person entered a private place, home, office, whatever. So that following episodes ranged from, say, 2 or 3 minute episodes, when someone might get into a car and they couldn't follow, ranging from that to 7 or 8 hour episodes. Someone might go to a restaurant, a movie, etc. Okay, with regard to the question I had, now that I'm in real space, now that I'm in physical space, actual space, what gives me a reason to move there? Doing pieces with schemes like this gave me that reason. Once I had decided on the scheme of following a piece, of following a person, decisions of time and space were out of my hands. I could be tied into another person's time and space. And this is something I think that I've always done throughout, and I'm not the only one. In other words, a piece didn't start with trying to get a visual effect. A piece started with giving myself a set of directions. Somewhat recently, some people in Acconci studio who are very, very computer adept, when I expressed jealousy that I didn't know the kind of computer programs they knew, said to me that, but you were working, you were kind of thinking like a computer from the beginning. A computer follows a set of directions. Okay. After doing pieces like this for a while in 1969, I started to have a nagging doubt. And what I liked about this piece was that I was a kind of moving integer, subjected to the scheme of following somebody else. At the same time that I liked that, I started to have questions, because I'm a person. Maybe I wasn't making enough use of the person personness of my person. If you could apply a language to these first pieces, the language might be something like I, a person, an agent, attend to it, a world considered as if it's out there. I find some way to connect myself to that world. Okay, once I started to have questions of myself being subjected to this scheme, the motion of pieces started to change. Rather than I attend to it, a world considered as if it's out there, I start to attend to me. I concentrate on myself. How do I prove, both to myself and others, that I'm concentrating on myself? One obvious way is to do something physical to myself. Apply some physical stress to my body. Once that physical stress is applied to my body, maybe the body can adapt to that stress. Maybe the body can change because of that stress. Some background at this point. I think my work, and at that time there were a number of people in different countries, some in the United States, some in Holland, some in Canada, some in Italy, all trying to do something with their body. It was the same kind of thing, I think, the kind of common language at that time was people talking about finding oneself. So I think in a time where the common language was finding oneself, I think I and probably a number of other people felt that what else can we do? The time is already doing this. We have to try to do maybe what the time is doing. Music of that time was probably the surest readable sign. Long songs, single voice, Van Morrison, Neil Young, a long song because time was needed to meander around the self, try to examine the self. Okay. An example of these, what people called, again, the names that people gave to certain kinds, to certain methods, probably very rarely or maybe never came from art doers. They probably came more from curators, from critics. So the words like body art were used here, were used in the United States. In Europe, it was much more action art. But an example, or what I was doing was this long film called Conversions, a 3-part film. The notion of film should be commented on. The way and a lot of people did film at that time. We didn't really have money to do film, but we certainly had money to buy a simple, everywhere available Super 8 camera. So most of the time I would set up a camera in front of me. I would then stand in front of the camera. And I think the notion of being in front of the camera started me thinking of how these pieces should be. The camera is, in camera language, shooting me. The camera is doing something to me. Maybe I, in turn, have to then do something to me, to myself, to my body.